now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book The Man Crisis comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. A pair of state senators are proposing to make prostitution legal in the state of New York. Now, this pair of state senators are looking to try to pass legislation that will legalize prostitution in the state of New York before the New York State Legislature ends its session on June 6th. And in this pair of proposed bills, state senators Liz Krueger and Julia Salazar are proposing to reform prostitution laws here in New York and make it where prostitution is legal in the state of New York, similar to the way it is in the city of Las Vegas in the state of Nevada. Now, in this pair of proposed laws, Liz Krueger says that she wants to shield sex workers and only go after Johns who solicit prostitutes, whereas Julia Salazar's proposal would legalize every aspect of prostitution in the state of New York. Now, Liz Krueger is one of these moderate members of the Blue Party, whereas Julia Salazar is a radical socialist who believes that sex workers are independent entrepreneurs and are victims of traffickers and prosecutors. Now, this whole proposal is designed to try to decriminalize sex work and make it where sex workers, like prostitutes, are under the same laws as any other worker. However, this proposal basically makes no real logical sense when you take a critical look at the whole approach that both of these pieces of legislation make as related to the law. Now, when it comes to Liz Krueger's proposal, it makes no logical sense because she says she's going to shield sex workers from any sort of criminal prosecution who are over 18 and only go after Johns who solicit prostitution. And that makes no logical sense because while you're saying that the sex worker is participating in a sex act in exchange for money is legal, what's happening is you're going to criminalize the man who is soliciting the sex. And again, that basically does not really go out and make it legal, because if the man soliciting sex is still committing a crime, then it basically shows that this whole law makes no logical sense, because you're basically criminalizing the man for soliciting the sex, but not the woman for selling the sex in the first place. So that law in and of itself basically wouldn't even stand a constitutional challenge and would just basically fall apart. Whereas Julia Salazar's proposal to legalize every aspect of prostitution in the state of New York makes no logical sense, because there is no whole apparatus or policy put in place to regulate the industry of prostitution like there is in the state of Nevada as related to Las Vegas. Now, when it comes to Las Vegas and Nevada, yes, prostitution is legal, but prostitution in the state of Nevada, in Las Vegas, is heavily regulated, and all of those places where people go to see prostitutes, like the Bunny Ranch, have to follow stringent policies as related to maintaining the health of the sex workers, as related to making sure that they're not carrying any sort of venereal diseases, and there are policies meant to be put in place as related to maintaining the health and safety of individuals who work in places like brothels. So there are codes on the books as related to going out and protecting the sex workers in places like Las Vegas, but this pair of pieces of legislation that are trying to be slipped through to in here in New York don't provide any sort of legislation to allocate money for infrastructure for regulating the sex industry. And that's where there's a big problem with this law that's being proposed, that they're trying to slip through before the legislative session ends, is that law is basically being pushed through based on emotions by women as related to the entire sex industry. These pieces of legislation are basically being proposed as related to the feelings of both of these leftists without ever creating any sort of infrastructure for overseeing the licensing and regulation of sex workers like they have in Las Vegas, that ensures that possibly there will be no transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. Moreover, there's whole policy in Las Vegas to ensure that sex workers are individuals who are licensed and regulated by the state of Nevada to ensure that there is no way for opportunists like sex traffickers to go out and exploit women who they go out and kidnap to be a part of their brothels. That's the big problem with this legislation. Again, it really is they're not proposed pieces based on any sort of structure. And what they would do was basically create chaos like we have in New York as related to the legislation that basically looked to try to attempt to legalize marijuana. That legislation basically created chaos because, yes, it opened the door for people to be able to legally smoke weed that they bought from the few marijuana shops here in New York. But what it didn't do was create a infrastructure that would allow the people to have a understanding of how to sell marijuana. And again, this led to an explosion of what are called smoke shops here in New York City. And these smoke shops not only sell marijuana, but they also sell other illegal drugs such as fentanyl, such as methamphetamine, such as ketamine, such as K2, which is illegal and synthetic marijuana. And anywhere you go, you can see these packets all around. And again, you see these packets all around because these pieces of legislation designed to reform these vices as related to criminal law basically create more chaos because they are, again, pieces of legislation formed on emotion without ever understanding the impact that they have on communities. Now, when it comes to this prostitution law, it's going to make life even worse as related to the quality of life here in New York and New York City where I'm living. It's going to make life a lot more chaotic because when you have legalized marijuana, it basically makes it where you have addicts running around creating chaos after they go to the store to get their weed and smoke up and get high. These are the individuals who, after they get high, go on trains and menace people. And they also go out here and participate in dysfunctional behaviors like pulling emergency brakes on trains as they're having their episodes after as they're getting high. That's what we got as related to the legalization of marijuana and the chaos that's ensued from all of these so-called illegal smoke shops that have basically opened up as these people have looked to sell marijuana. They're laced with PCP, angel dust, and other assorted drugs in them to get people the highs that they want, that as related to the illegal weed, as related to the selling of weed. And with prostitution, what we will see is an explosion of prostitution with individuals basically going out and being on the streets, soliciting themselves, creating a very dangerous health crisis as related to New York City, because with legal prostitutes standing around without any regulation to make sure that these individuals are not having venereal diseases like hepatitis, HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea, and herpes, there's nobody regulating this the way it is in Las Vegas, whereas individuals in Las Vegas, you cannot work doing sex work if you are seen and known to have had a venereal disease. But here in New York, because these legislators are writing a law based on emotion without establishing infrastructure to regulate, oversee, and license individuals, what's happening is that if this law passes, yes, you'll have prostitutes on the streets and prostitutes legally able to stand wherever they want. And that's, again, another disturbing thing, because we recently had a situation where migrant prostitutes were all over in a place in Queens right next to public schools and residences, soliciting their work. And again, that's a real big problem. And it's a real big problem because it really destroys the quality of life for most New Yorkers. It destroys the quality of life because basically you're taking people from the bottom of society and allowing them to become mainstreamed and allowing them to go out and believe that they are socially acceptable. That's what's really, again, a dangerous thing. And again, a dangerous thing because it compromises the entire moral position of women here in New York and basically takes the moral position of women here in New York in a bad direction. Now, the old African proverb states that a race can rise no higher than the moral position of its women. And as the woman goes, so goes the race. And the direction that New York would go in is a race to the bottom. If we went out here and legitimized prostitution, we would basically take our whole state of New York and put it in a state of being at rock bottom. Because if you go out here and promote prostitution as socially acceptable, what this is going to do is destroy the quality of life here in New York, and it's going to destroy the quality of life because the prostitute will be walking around acting like they're socially acceptable and also modeling this behavior for young children because some of these sex workers, again, don't understand boundaries, don't understand discretion, and these individuals will basically go out standing outside of places like public schools and private schools and also standing outside of businesses like daycares, again, destroying the quality of life in these places, and again, destroying the quality of life in these communities, because what it does is, again, goes out and make it where you have women just, again, selling themselves and sacrificing their intangibles of womanhood, such as their dignity and self-respect. I mean, basically what they're going to do is make it where you're out here having these women selling themselves. And again, while people will sit there, the leftists will say, oh, what was the dignity that it's about? It's about making sex work into legitimate work. Well, again, if you want to make it into legitimate work, then we need legitimate policies to regulate this behavior to ensure that individuals are not standing outside of places like people's businesses, outside of public schools where there are children, and there are places where, again, this is, again, regulated, but the whole thing is that why would you want to make sex work into real work? I mean, that's the critical question I have to ask, because this profession basically is being done by people who are desperate, and in a lot of cases, it's done by people who are desperate and really don't have any ability to go out here and learn how to make any sort of living. Again, this is behavior that people at the bottom of society participate in, and when you have people at the bottom being established as the standard, you basically have made it where the quality of life in your city is going to go into the abyss. And it's going to go into the abyss because what you're doing is you're making it where people like prostitutes can go out here and believe that they are just out here, can participate in this kind of behavior, and it's perfectly normal. And again, this is not something you want to promote as normal if you want to have a quality of life, and again, you want to have your girls having a moral position, because if a girl is seeing prostitutes all the time, then she's not going to be thinking about looking to be a girlfriend and work her way to graduating to be a wife. No, she's going to start selling herself short, commodifying relationships, and that's the most disturbing thing about this whole policy. Again, it comes from what I talk about in my book, The Woman Crisis, women thinking that they're going to commodify a relationship, and again, that's what prostitution is the foundation of, commodifying a relationship and not seeing a man as a person that you can relate to on any level. No, you just see him as somebody to participate in exchanging your body for money, and that basically sells relationships short. And do we want to promote selling yourself short in relationships as socially acceptable? And that's another critical question I want to ask Liz Kruger and Julia Salazar. I mean, do we want to start promoting having relationships as something that's commodified? I mean, do we want to start promoting this as a social norm? because your plans to reform the oldest profession don't reform it. No, it just mainstreams it and has it out there as something normal for girls to participate in. And that's really sad because it shows the complete moral decline of America since the sexual revolution. Because since the sexual revolution, we have seen women go from being in courtships that were controlled by families to the rise of the feminist movement, which basically led to women looking to be sexually promiscuous. And as they became sexually promiscuous, they wound up going from being in relationships where they were wives to basically being in relationships that were commodified, where they were trading themselves in exchange for a covert contract for a wedding ring, to going to the level of going to being in pornography and things like OnlyFans with adult entertainment. And now we have women on the road to basically being legal prostitutes, basically turning the whole male-female relations into one big commodified transaction and an infrastructure and an industry for making it into a business. And that again cheapens relationships as related to the Most High God, because God made women for men and to be a helpmeet, not meant to be a harlot who sells herself to the highest bidder. And again, when you have them pushing this type of legislation, and I wouldn't say push, but sneak this in, again, that just shows how unethical this whole policy is, that you have these two politicians basically trying to sneak legislation in without ever letting the public know that this piece of legislation is being proposed. I mean, that just shows how unethical both of these state senators are, and the sad state of affairs of our all-blue state legislature, which basically passes dysfunctional policies like bail reform, like marijuana reform, and that are just destroying the entire moral state of New York and turning it from the Big Apple and the state of New York, from a state that is, again, a state that is part of the Union, to a dysfunctional place. I mean, that's what happens here with this type of legislation. Again, I don't believe we should be out here making prostitution legal. I mean, when it comes to prostitution, this is something that's illegal because it is immoral, as I see it, for a woman to sell her body in exchange to a man for money. I mean, that's just something that's just reprehensible. And it's something that is made illegal because basically if we commodify relationships like this, again, it destroys the whole aspect of relationships and people coming together. And it also, with the whole commodification, this opens the door for sex traffickers, again, without any sort of infrastructure to regulate these individuals. You are opening the door for sex traffickers to be able to exploit women. So this whole thing, on one side, you have the leftists saying they're empowering women, but what they're doing is taking power away from women, because if you make it legal without any regulation, all that's going to do is encourage sex traffickers to be able to believe they can go out here and bring women to New York, just like they brought migrants here to New York, and that's going to turn New York's quality of life into a sewer. And it's already bad as it is, with the bail reform letting Pookie and Ray Ray wreak havoc, the marijuana reform having people out here smoking weed on the streets, and if you have prostitutes to add on to that, you're basically going to turn New York back into a hellhole worse than the days of the 1970s and 1980s. No, you're going to turn it into something on the level of a third world country. But Liz Kruger and Julia Salazar don't really care about that because they're caught up in their ideals and don't see the real damage that this legislation would do to the lives of everyday people who live in the state of New York. Now, if you want to learn why many women are in a sad state of affairs these days and really don't know how to function, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you'd like to learn why so many black women are struggling and cannot really have healthy relationships, you can pick up my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find Why 70% of Black Women Are Single at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. Now, this was a video requested by a viewer who didn't really put any money on the PayPal or the Cash App, but if you want to request a video, you can send a donation of a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box, and if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And again, if you want videos, you've got to pay for them because my time is money. So please, if you want videos, put your money on the table. Otherwise, I'm just not gonna hear what you're saying. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available for the first time in paperback, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. Learn all the reasons why so many black women can't find a husband and why 70% of black women are single. Get your copy of Why 70% of Black Women Are Single on Amazon.com today.
Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.